Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of The Last of Us. A great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So first and foremost, when it comes to The Last of Us, I know the story of The Last of Us. I never played it myself, but I watched someone play it years and years ago because when it originally came out, I didn't have a PS3. So I've just, so I know the general story. I might not know everything, but I feel like I got a good enough grasp on The Last of Us, but I will comment here and there about questions I had throughout the episode that I'm curious if other people have answers. Because some of the questions I have might be answered in the games. I would assume they're not pulling anything from 2 in knowledge-wise, or maybe there's certain things that only come up in 2 in some regards, world-building-wise, that they just maybe put in a show. I don't know. So I'm probably going to have questions because I know a little bit of 2 storyline, but that's about it. I can only watch someone play a few hours of it. But either way, so my point is, there might have been, some notes or extra dialogue that I probably don't know off the top of my head that kind of answer some of the questions I have, but that's why I'm if I have any questions that, just know that my knowledge is not I know The Last of Us in and out. But I thought the opening was so interesting to kind of give that perspective of things, going with, the fungi element of it. I also love that it's John Hannah and Christopher Heyerdahl. When I saw Christopher Heyerdahl, I was like, what? And the moment John Hannah started talking, I was like, is that John Hannah? It totally is. I was like, that's super cool. But yeah, they were having these conversations in the 60s about cortisol and stuff like that. I was like, oh, that's fascinating. And then we cut to 2003. I was like, interesting. Because I'm assuming, God, when did The Last of Us come out? 2013? Something like that, right? So I'm assuming, at most, the story takes place in, 2033. I mean, they've said it, so the moment it's 2003 popped up, I was like, oh, wow, they're setting it in modern day. I thought that was interesting. And it never clicked in my head until, what that could, because immediately the moment 2003 popped up, I was like, that's an interesting point to make the story take place, too, because it's and it's also September of 2003. I'm like, it's September 24th or something like that? I was like, man, that's 2 years since 9/11. I was like, and that's relevant, too, because later on, Sarah makes a remark of, oh my God, do you think it's terrorists or something? I was like, of course that would be in the back of your mind. It's only been 2 years since 9/11. I was like, and you just had the 2nd year anniversary of it. So I was like, that was interesting, timing wise and stuff like that to make you jump to that conclusion. Cause that was never they never spitball any theories about what's actually going on and stuff. Right. But it also plays into the technology stuff because Joel had an old school phone. I was like, oh my God, I haven't seen a phone like that in ages. And it didn't even click until Sarah was going downstairs. I was like, oh, I wonder if they're going to do the phone scene where she sees Tommy's text. And I was like, well, she wouldn't because Joel and Tommy are together. And I'll circle back to some of the earlier stuff, but it's just, I'm focusing on this right now because I want to get these details out. But then I was like, all right, because Joel had a more modernish phone at the time. It was an actual smartphone at the time. And I was like, well, so I guess that's why you it plays into obviously this being set years before the game. So you kind of play into that. Yeah. So I was like, right. She wouldn't, well, like I said, Joel was with Tommy, but also, he wouldn't have a phone that looks like that for her to read the text message being like, okay, where are you? Get back to me. Either way. I think this opening did a really good, well, I'll say opening, because it's the first maybe 20 minutes of the episode, before, we get to that. I don't know if that's kind of I doubt, I'm so curious would that, line up with the video game in some regards. It'd be really interesting if they did that. That'd be too much attention to detail to really do that, but what I thought was fascinating, it's just like the game, you get Sarah's perspective. And I do like that. It's right, you spend a little bit more time for Sarah, but it's also from immediately you're like, oh, I see what you're doing. You're terrible because you're trying to make us spend more time with Sarah. So when that time comes, get you with a gut punch. Because, also it's an adaptation, so it's never going to be one-to-one. But I was so curious, how close things were going to be in some regards. She made that remark of, he's like, oh, how do you even pay for this? She's like, oh, I sell drugs, hardcore drugs. And I was like, yeah, I love that you kept that specific line too. but they tweaked it because he was like, okay, because in the game it's like, oh, you can pay with at least you can help pay the bills or something like that. And he's like, oh, it's better than the work that I do or something like that. And I love that they, like, just on the TV, because of everything going down, she heard drugs, like, so that's why she made that reference, I think. Because it comes out of left field in the game, but here it's like, oh, it makes sense because she was just hearing them talk about, like, oh yeah, people are kind of wilding out in the streets. We think it might be some, like, new drug on the streets or something like that, making people kind of go wild. But I do also appreciate kind of like the slow build up, because like obviously it went like, I mean, it's very reflective of the game, where it's like the game went 0 to 60 because it's like, yo, Sarah went to sleep and woke up and then like the world was ending. Whereas this, they kind of, they tweak it a little bit. Like she notices in class, like one of her classmates is like hand is twitchy and she's almost like, what's that about? And then later on, that creepy scene when she's at the neighbor's house and it's like the daughter Miss Adler taking care of her mom. Like her mom is in the background kind of twitching and her mouth's open and stuff. I was like, that's so creepy. And I love how they shot it too. It's like, it's in background, depth of field, out of focus. And stuff. I was like, that's so creepy. Cause I think that's so interesting because like more often than not, when we see the infection pop off, it's like, yo, you're already infected. You're acting wild. Like, I don't think we've ever really seen like once again, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think they ever really showcase like the early signs of the infection. Which, speaking of it, because it's relevant to the topic, I don't think they ever broke down the infection process. It was like neck, face, and all that. Oh yeah, 5 to like 15 minutes. It was like your torso, your arms and stuff like that. It's like was it 2 to 8 hours, and then your leg and foot is like 12 to 24. And I was like, did they ever break that down like that? I was like, that's so I mean, obviously we know they continued researching that stuff like after the fact, so eventually they probably would get it down to a science of roughly, I mean, that's still a broad strokes, but I mean, even narrowing it down to that much is interesting. But that's fascinating detail to be like, oh yeah, like face and neck, oh, you're getting super infected super quick. That's so interesting. Like, I don't remember any lines of dialogue, but that, like I said, maybe there's some notes or something or extra dialogue there that, like in the game, that showcases that. But like I said, getting things from Sarah's perspective, seeing her get the watch fixed, but like the people who own the store, like the wife is kind of like, no, we're closing. The husband's like, why are you freaking out? Like there's more police on the street. You even see a SWAT vehicle go by. You're like, oh man. Like I said, it's like that. At first, it's just kind of like a little nothing. It's just in the background. And once again, you're still getting things from Sarah's perspective, which I thought was pretty dope. Joel having to go get Tommy because he got into like a bar fight or something like that. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Also, I was assuming Tommy, but maybe it's Joel too. Like there was also like a veteran stick. I was like, oh, Tommy's a vet? I didn't know that. Is that something they did just for the show, or was that something that's even in the game? But yeah, like that's the thing too. Like Tommy and Joel were together when everything popped off. Tommy was looking for Joel when things popped off. So that's kind of a nice little change. So once again, getting things from Sarah's perspective, her going over to the neighbor's house and seeing things kind of pop off like that. Joel's still killing someone in front of her, but granted, it's not in the same way, in the same vein. It's like, hey, Joel, what's going on? Denise, get back in your house, lock the door. Which I should also like note, like obviously all the like accents everyone's putting on. It's like, oh man, it's so, especially when you like, with Pedro and Bella. So it's interesting, obviously them having to put on the accents. It's a little bit, at least especially in Bella's case, because I've only ever heard her use her natural accent. So like in like his Dark Materials, it's like one thing there's even that movie she's in on Hulu. It's like a kind of a romance comedy. She's like Catherine or something like that. I think it's like called Birdie or something like that. But even then she uses her. So like hearing her put on an American accent, it's like, oh, it's so weird. Cause I've only ever heard you use your British accent. So regardless, this might be I was about to say, other than, Wonder Woman 84, I was like, this might be the only other thing I've ever seen Pedro in. I've never watched The Mandalorian, so. Tangent, so once again, it's just kind of an interesting thing, just like hearing like Pedro put on this type of accent. Regardless, I think they also did a really nice job of filming everything in the scene, like especially in the truck, from that perspective of like almost like you were playing the game, because it's like, right, you've got the camera in the back and you've got Joel and Tommy like on both sides, and it's like, oh man, that was so interesting how that was done, and it's supposed to capture that feel of like, right, you're from the back seat looking at things and hearing things from Sarah's perspective, and obviously like she's in the back seat like freaking out, understandably, and also love because you actually do get to see her face. You don't really get to, the closest you get is at one point you can lean against the glass of the window and see her reflection. That's all you get. But like to see the camera like facing her and see a tear roll down her, I'm like, ew, dude. Like, because you only heard the panic in her voice, you never actually got to see her face during that car ride. And also like when they abandoned the family on the side, it's like they got a kid, Joe, so do we. Keep going, you know? It's like, all right, I know, like the exact directions of like where they're supposed to be going. It's like, oh, there's Jimmy's farm on fire. I'm like, oh my God, dude, this is so weird and so surreal. Cutting through the fields was really interesting. I also love they're not the only ones that had that idea. A couple people did, so I thought that was neat. They were going to go through the city and stuff like that. Wasn't Jimmy the person that they shot? That Joel shoots in the game, the neighbor that attacked, like, wasn't that, because I know the farm ends up on fire, but was it Jimmy's farm, or because they changed the neighbor situation, because it's like it was an older couple looking after Miss Adler's mom, or maybe that was her mother-in-law. Either way, that's the circumstances, which I guess that's meant to add the brutality of it. It's like, oh yeah, here's this old lady got these tentacles coming out of her mouth, ready to come at you. Well, this fun guy coming out of her, like, it makes it that much more brutal when Joel has to bash her head in with a wrench. It was a one swing, so. The show also does a really good job of subverting expectation, because it's like, right, they know a lot of people watching this have already played the game. A lot of people have played the game, or at the very least done like me, have seen someone play the game at the very least. But when this situation happened, I was like, all right, they're about to get hit, and they didn't. I was like, whoa, wait, oh, subverting expectation, because you know everyone's expecting. It's like, all right, when's the hit gonna happen? But it's like, no, it was like from debris hitting them from one of the planes crashing, which is definitely something not in the game, because I know a lot of people commented on it in the trailer. It's like, whoa, they're going like bigger on the scale of like what's going down. It's like, yeah, showing like planes super low to the ground. So yeah, one ended up falling out of the sky, which is like, you know, questions like that and Thanos were kind of what happened to people who got snapped, who were in planes and they got snapped back? You get questions like that. But now it's like, yeah, we see like, hey, there were people on those planes who were infected, stuff went wrong, and they came crashing down. Which also I feel like maybe feels a little pertinent to, sadly, because once again, the time frame it's set in. So, because at first, like before the vehicle crashed, I was like, oh, are they just gonna have to get out the vehicle? I was like, oh, interesting. But then it's like, okay, the plane crashed and they have the scene, and so Joel has to carry Sarah, and I was like, all right, dude, this is it. I was like, we all know what's coming, and I'm like, am I going to feel the same way? I've seen it before. I've seen it a couple of times. I was like, it still sucks every time, and I'm like, is it going to hit me? And it still did. It's like, it's the little sounds, the little like pain noises she makes. It still gets me. It's like, I was like, no. I don't know, like, I don't know if it did it for anyone else. Which sounds so effed up to say. It still worked for me, because I started tearing up. I was like, wow, I knew what was going to happen, but I think it's like, that's why they lean into like following Sarah just a little bit more, like slowly, like going from like 0 to 30 rather than 0 to 60 when it comes to the build up. But I mean, you're going like 0 to 30, more like 0 to 10, and then all of a sudden you go to 10 to like 100. That I guess be more accurate description of like the ramp up. But, you know, spending that extra time with Sarah, once again, getting even more time from her perspective, because that's going to be so fascinating for people who don't know the story, who's like, yeah, people who just aren't into video games, or who just in the 10 years or whatever have never played any version of the game, or once again, you know, or at very least never watched anyone play any version of the game. how is that scene going to be for them for the first? Because it's like, you would think like, okay, she's going to be fine because we're getting it from her perspective. That's what makes it so gut-wrenching. And it's like, yeah, you get it from her perspective, and then it switches over to Joel's perspective, video game-wise, you know, with him carrying her. And and what makes it even harder, like, because I don't think that soldier, like, apologized when he did it. He was like, I'm sorry, I'm following orders. That's what he's like, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And it's just kind of like, right, they're trying to contain the infection. They want to take the chance. It's like, right, she's hurt. It's like, yeah, her ankle, sir. I don't know whether it's a situation of, did they take it as ankle as like, oh, she got bit by it, but it's also like, it's early days. We don't know what this is. Because they had started talking about it like on a more international scale before it even started popping off here. They were like, oh, they referenced somewhere and they were like, Jakarta. They were like, yeah, because like Joel and Tommy had a whole conversation. Where's Jakarta? Is that a country? It's like, no, it's a city in, or is it the capital of Indonesia? It's like, yeah, it's not even a country. It's a city in Indonesia. And they're like, oh, well, you know, at least like one of us is smart or something like that. But man, and then we get the 20 years later. I was like, fascinating. I was wondering whether or not, how people were going to react to that, dude. Because that's the shock. Everyone had that the first time of like 20 years. Like the fact is like you jump that's a massive time jump. And just to start off, not even with Joel like you do in the game. Start off with that little kid. And that whole situation playing out the way it does. And the guard, she's trying to make it easy for the kids. Like, all right, when it's all said and done, we'll get you what you wanted, okay? And then, like, obviously we cut to them burning bodies. And the lady doesn't want to do it because it's a kid, the same kid. Honestly, it didn't even click in my head until now. I was like, oh, they focus on that a lot, showing the shoes and stuff. It's like, because they focus on that kid's shoes to show you, yeah, they ended up having to put him down because he was infected. Because I saw the red, I was like, no, red means you're infected, right? I was like, oh, and they're treated, but it's like, yeah, you don't want to freak the kid out. It's like, poor kid. Like, he didn't even say anything. It's like, and, you know, just showing you, like, what this world is, that Joel kind of, like, he stands there for a second, picks the kid up, and just tosses him. Because just showing you, like, yeah, like, Joel's hardened after what he did. And the fact is, the parallels are like, yeah, here I am carrying this kid as a reminder of my own kid. But he also has the advantage of, well, I don't know you, kid, and I probably had to burn so many bodies before, men, women, children, you know, you kind of get numb to it. Like, that lady couldn't do it because it was a child, but Joel is just kind of like, it is what it is. It's a job. We got to do it. I mean, plus, the face being covered up makes it a little easier, I think. Makes it a little more easier to be desensitized, at least in Joel's case. So that's interesting. The Robert scene was fascinating because I was like, oh, wow. I was like, wow, we're getting this perspective. Because, you know, by the time we met with Tess, the Robert thing already went down. And that right, Robert and his people is like, yo, she got jumped. She's like, they don't matter. You know who sent them? You know, because of YouTube, I'm not going to say, but effing Robert, right? I'll cuss at some point in time because I can't help but let one fly at one point in time. But, and so for her to be making that, like, Robert's like, okay, now, I'm sorry. Like, she's like, no, it's fine. Just let me go. I'm gonna go home. It's like, I just want to make sure we're okay. She's like, Robert, it's fine. We're good. Like, she's like, but my guys, it's like, yeah, they beat me up, whatever. Like, you disciplined them. I love that she's trying to, because Robert's scared. He's like, please, I don't want this to turn into a misunderstanding. She's like, what are you going to do? Hold me here forever? It's like, yo. Also, I love that it's Anna Torv that plays, Tess. I was like, because I didn't realize, I didn't notice that until someone else had pointed it out. Because I didn't know, because I avoided the full trailer, but I watched the teaser, and I didn't realize that was her until someone else pointed it out. I was like, oh, Anna Torv, that's super awesome. But yeah, I'm just another person putting on an American accent. I love all the people putting on American accents in this. Regardless. Also, the actor who plays Robert, I've seen that actor in like a handful of things. But that was so interesting. And then it's like, oh, the fireflies are blowing stuff up again. So it's like, oh, okay. And, that was kind of fascinating. Once again, just adding a little flavor to something you already know. And it's like, okay, here are the fireflies. Cause we never actually got to see the fireflies like pop off at all during the game, did we? Cause most like 90% of the Fireflies you came across were already dead. You know, so I don't think you ever got to see them pop off. Nope, I'm stupid. That's like the initial incident when like Joel and Tess were going to go find Robert, and then like stuff popped off when they were about to go through like the gate. It's like, oh, Firefly! Like, I forgot, right. But even then, it's like you never got to see them, and next time you see the Fireflies, they were literally all executed. So, you know, but seeing that guy on top, like kind of sniping and stuff like that, so... Speaking of Joel, we kind of do a little world building, kind of showcase some of the jobs that they do, like obviously burning bodies and stuff like that. Obviously, it's like, oh, how much does sewage, which job costs more? It's like, the one that deals with the sewer. It's like, all right, I'll take that job. And making backdoor deals with the guards and stuff. The fact is, he's selling drugs, so it's like, it doesn't seem like they're in the... Well, we know that they bought the guns off of Robert, but Robert ends up selling them to Marlene and the Fireflies. But in this case, it's a battery. And also the motivation is different. Like, I don't know if we ever found out, like, I don't remember the specific reasons why they were trying to buy guns in the game. Like, it's not Tommy related. In this case, and that's also an interesting change too, Joel and Tommy are in good terms. Like, they're still cooperating because it's like, cool, I haven't heard from Tommy in like 3 weeks. Usually it takes at most a day for him to respond. So yeah, I'm kind of nervous. I was like, that's interesting because like based on the game, they made it seem like him and Tommy hadn't spoken in a very long time by the time, or at least a while by the time the games had started. So it's like, I mean, that also plays in his beef with Marlene because it feels like you're the one that you got my brother caught up. And that's also when the guy was like, hey, if you're ever feeling lost, and he's like, if you tell me look towards the light, I'm going to break your jaw. It's like, well, he has it's eventually like this quote unquote rebellion of sorts. Kind of like it wears you down after like 20 years. It's like, it's all BS. Plus your own brother got swooped up in it. So like, you're going to have like an extra inkling of, cause I know like Tommy like was with the Fireflies, but he left. I don't know if that's still the case in this universe too, because that was the thing of like, cause I remember the Marlene and Joel dialogue of, he left you too, Joel. So he was no longer with the Fireflies. He was kind of off doing his own thing, living a quiet life, right? But he's still in the mix of things, I think. Maybe that's also why he went quiet. So that does lean towards me being like, Melanie Linsky, because I know she was in the trailer. That must be, she must play Tommy's wife. Not unless she's someone else, but I can only assume she's Tommy's wife. But either way, they were trying to get a car battery because I guess they were trying to like escape Boston's QZ zone, quarantine zone, I guess. Like I said, like that was never like their motive. They were like but they were gathering ammunition, but I don't know if that's just because they were going to leave and stuff like that. But like the car battery is something specific to this, which I'm like, oh, that's so fascinating. We're bringing up a car battery storyline at this early in the story instead of later on. I just think that's interesting. I wonder, will they still do that later on too, considering? I don't know, I found that fascinating. But I also thought it was so interesting kind of getting a little peek behind the scenes with the Fireflies. Because obviously, like, by the time we get introduced to Marlene, she's already shot, everything's kind of popped off. But, in this particular case, she's got plans and not all her people know. She's already got Ellie. And it's just like, right, they're having Ellie, like, do this test of, like, oh, like, you know, what's your name? And she's like, yeah, and counting slowly, and she gives them the finger, which I also love. I'm like, yeah. She's just as foul-mouthed in this as she is in the game. I love it. Maybe even more so. Dude, I love it. But I also think that's such an interesting dynamic with Ellie. Do correct me in the comments down below. Once again, I don't remember everything, but wasn't there like a line of dialogue that Marlene's connection to Elliot's like, oh yeah, I knew her parents or something like that? I think that's the case. I don't remember. But yeah, that too, obviously Robert double dipping even in this universe as he did in the game was like, yo, already sold the battery I promised to you to the, someone else. Obviously they didn't know at the time, but it's like, all right, the Fireflies. So they're trying to get a vehicle, so they're trying to leave, and they're trying to take Ellie with them. I even love that line from Marlene, like, knowing her name, because it's like, oh, you grew up in one of, like, those, like, oh, what are you going to do, grow up and be, like, part of the military or whatever? She's like, I didn't choose to be there. It's like, no, you're there because I left you there. And it's like, what are you, like, are you my fucking mom or something? And she's like, do I look like I'm your mom? And it's like, no, you do not. I was like, I love that, because I think that's them being a little cheeky, because it's almost like that would be the thing of like, wait, you're my mom? It's like, no, I'm not your mom, you idiot. I love that. I think I just love that delivery too. You my fucking mom or something? It's like, no, do I look like it? It's like, no, but I left you there, but now it turns out you're going to be super important. And considering what I know about people who are, is this the first time Marlene's come across someone that's not in that, obviously, Ellie's circumstances. Also, do not, under any circumstances, tell anyone, because if you do, no one's going to believe the whole thing of, hey, you're not infected. They're going to see that, they're going to think you're infected, and they're going to kill you. You're going to die. So keep it a secret what we're talking about. Understandably so, because it only takes hours for people to turn I think that's the only line of dialogue we ever got about, like, I think that's the only line of dialogue you ever talk about, like, referencing, like, how long it takes to turn. It might even be faster in this than it is in the game, but maybe not. I think they say, like, a few hours, maybe like 1 or 2 days, and something, it will already kind of look worse. I think that's the line of dialogue we get in the game. But it's like, it's a pretty quick turnaround. I feel like it might, like I said, do correct me, it feels like it's even quicker in the TV show, but either way. Because the reason why I'm kind of, like, circling back, Marlene and Ellie, like, when you first meet them, like, Ellie's pretty tight with Marlene. It's so interesting considering her circumstances are so, like, it's boom, boom, boom. It's so fast. Like, it's just kind of like I wasn't with you, kicking with you for a while. It's like, no, you basically kind of kidnapped me. But it's like, yeah, I saved your life because I'm the reason why they didn't immediately shoot you on sight. That's why they were doing all the test results to be like, wow, she is infected. But the telltale signs of, like, slurred speech and, like, obviously, like, your motor functions and all that. Like the erratic kind of, like, twitching of the body, kind of early telltale signs of the infection. I also think it's an interesting choice making it so that it wasn't Tess and Joel that killed Robert. I mean, they weren't going to kill him, they were just going to mess him up. It's like, oh, like, I promised him you wouldn't hurt him, but I want you to hurt him. So, because it's like, right, you can't go all Clint Eastwood up in there because we need to find out where our battery is. So they do their thing. I love that they come across, and I'm curious how they're going to handle the spore thing, because it doesn't seem like they're handling it the same way. They might have removed that element completely from the show. Because they didn't, obviously the whole point was like, oh, they go down there because there's spores down there and they're not wearing them, But I mean, I guess, like, you don't need it because there aren't any spores. Maybe just this specific area doesn't have any spores. Because I know that it sprouts from, like, the bodies and stuff like that. But, like, the fact is that body was the way it was, and, like, they didn't bother with the mask thing. So I don't know if they're changing the rules a little bit, not making it as spore heavy in the show, or, like, how they're handling that. But I do love that. Like, once again, it's all said and done. Like, cool, she got attacked by, like, the military, and she went looking for Robert for the guns and stuff. But, like, he was already dead because Joel and Tessa killed him. And it's like, nah, he tried to screw Marlene over, so her squad, like, went to war with his, and her people are dead, and he's dead. So I was like, huh, you greedy bastard, and you got what you deserved. So I was like, wow. That's an interesting choice. But I also love Ellie still coming out and attacking them. And it's like, coming at him with the knife and everything. And I also love too, there was that line from, it's like, oh, she's like, terrorist. Was Riley a terrorist? And in that moment, Ellie got quiet. I was like, ooh. I mean, we already knew that they were going to introduce the Riley stuff because she's, at least based on even just the teaser trailer alone, she's in it. So I was like, interesting. I was like, was she a Firefly? Is she connected to the Fireflies? I didn't remember that. I don't remember Left Behind. I remember like them being obviously best friends, but there also being something more. There was not something. There was definitely more, but I didn't remember them ever talking about her being a Firefly or anything like that. And it also makes you wonder. I'm so curious. Like, I mean, maybe people who already know just based on like episode titles and stuff like that. But I'm so curious what episodes they're going to decide to include the Riley stuff. Like I said, I just think that's so interesting that they had that connection of like, yeah, like she knows enough about you just because it's like, hey, the Fireflies stay well informed, even to the point Marlene's like, oh, I know that you're looking for Tommy. And it's like, oh, she's like, it's kind of my job to know what's what here, you know? I am I do miss the Queen of the Fireflies statement. Did they ever specify that she was only like the Queen Bee here in like Boston? Maybe they did. I mean, obviously, it's like it's a rebellion, so there's different cells all across. I mean, that was the point. I want blowing up all these like Fedra buildings because I need them as far away from Boston when we make our move. So also, it's like, and her one of her right hand people, Kim, is like, no, let me do it. It's like, Kim, you don't even have a fucking ear right now. It's like I didn't even notice that until she said it and she turned her hair. I was like, oh God, oh Kim. Ugh, that sucks. So it's like, cool, Joel, give you everything you need. You just need to do this for me because I know what you're capable of. And Ellie's like, what are they capable of? It's like she sees that firsthand later on. But yeah, I love how they captured like that snot-nosed brat element of Ellie to some extent when they're together later on. And she's like figuring out their code and everything. She's like, oh yeah, like while you were asleep, wake me up before you go play. And he's like, what? She's like, gotcha. 80s means trouble. Code broken. And you're like, oh, you're such a little shit. I love it. I was like, oh, that's so good. But I also love that they reference Bill and Frank. I was like, dude, so Bill and Frank are already an established thing in this. That's interesting. Because Joel didn't know about Frank until they showed up there. Obviously, they knew about Bill. I think that's so interesting, too, that they're planning that far ahead. Because wasn't there, jumping ahead a little bit, didn't Joel only go to Bill considering everything went, spoilers, sideways? So I think that's what, like, Bill was kind of already a backup plan. Like, Bill's already incorporated in the plan. Maybe he always was in the game, but my understanding and my interpretation was always he was kind of like we're kind of screwed, so we kind of have to go to Bill. But it seems like in this case they're already referencing let's go to Bill, but also that it's we're going to Bill and Frank's, and she's like, who's Bill and Frank? I was like, that's so interesting. Which is going to be interesting how they depict that situation. Like, obviously we know how it plays out in the game, like their circumstances, but how is it going to play out when they're already an established thing in this? I'm so curious to see how that plays out. I always read it as like a thing between them, but I don't know if they're going to lean into that more in the TV show. It sounds like since they said Bill and Frank, that don't just sound like a partnership thing. Like, I always interpret that, and it seemed like they were leaning into a whole, oh yeah, it's a thing between them that, it seems like they're going to really lean. Like I said, I'm just curious to see how they handle that dynamic. So, also that line of, your watch is broken. It's like also, you mumble in your sleep. I didn't also bring that up either, too. And I think this is going to be interesting. Just a little extra scene I thought was neat was when Joel was in bed, like, before, and Tess came back to the place, like, earlier in the episode, she cuddled up next to him. I was like, that's interesting. Because, like, we never, in game, like, they hint to, she's like, you gotta know, if there's something here between us, that's as much as you got from, like, oh, so there was something between Joel and Tess. It wasn't really fully defined, but it was something. So just thought that was kind of neat. Them sneaking out, and I love that she's like, oh my god, I'm outside the wall. It's like, get down, you idiot. And I do love that. Obviously, they're sneaking out and they end up running into the guy Joel had made a deal with earlier in the episode, selling like pills to and stuff. And the guy had told him, like, oh, lay low. He's like, oh, that makes that scene even more personal. And obviously, Ellie popped off on the dude. And Joel, in that moment, having a PTSD moment, thinking back to Sarah, went off on that guy. Because we saw that part of that scene in even like the teaser alone, him kind of going wild. And I think Ellie kind of looking at it. But yeah, he beat that dude's face in with his fist, dude, homie. I was like, yo. Because there's always, like, Joel's a very angry person, and to see him kind of pop off like that, considering, like, he was triggered in that moment, and he kind of looks back to her being like, almost like, he almost wanted to be like, are you okay? But he almost has to snap back to her by being like, oh, you're not Sarah, you know? And it's like, okay, wait, you're infected. It's like, no. This is like a couple weeks old. Please don't kill me. Like, it's like, fine, we don't have any choice. Fedra's going to get here any minute. We got to go. So interesting. We also don't get that line of dialogue of just kind of back and forth between like, oh, did Marlene set us up? It's like, well, no, why would she set you up? It's like, well, she doesn't know Marlene enough to have those type of conversations. So I think that's why they kind of tweaked that scene in that regard. But obviously we cut back to the radio and at a Joel's place and the music plays. Was it Never Let Me Down Again by Depeche Mode? Which I'm like, do I actually know any Depeche Mode songs? I had to look that up, just, Googling the lyrics. But I was like, do I even know any Depeche Mode? Maybe it's probably one of those things of like, oh, you know some, you just don't realize you know it. Maybe it's one of those things. Either way, obviously, once again, showcasing that, hey, Ellie was right about deciphering that code of like, yeah, that's trouble. And obviously, we even hear the screeching as we kind of pan up to the building and stuff like that. So, hell of a first episode, because that's going to also be so interesting too to see where they decide to end the episode story beat wise. And you're like, okay, that's a lot to get in. I feel like that's still a good chunk of the story. That's like what the first. I don't know what would you put that at? Maybe like first hour of the game done in this TV show. Maybe more so, maybe first hour and a half, maybe. I don't know what you put that. Because obviously you're also cutting out a lot of the traversal and some of the encounters that they end up having. Like, well, obviously they're going to have the real encounters like next episode. But like encounters with like the infected and stuff like that, runners and stuff. And obviously hearing the screeching is probably going to, like, obviously they're going to have their run-ins with the clickers next episode too. So it's definitely going to be fascinating to see. Once again, just continue down this route, see what's the same, what's changed, how they handle this adaptation. It's going to be so fascinating to see. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.